On this final Friday of the election campaign, the pursuit of political supremacy. The Liberals' quest to push supporters to the ballot box, the Conservative leader's refusal to acknowledge Alberta's premier.
It was like he'd never heard of the guy.
And the NDP on the offense in Quebec, revolting against a culture of misogyny.
Stop this violence!
No more silence! Western University students take a stand by walking out for women. And a new fight for Afghanistan veterans, their mission to have a comrade bestowed with Canada's highest military honor.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Farah Nasser.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. It is the final push before the federal election and what's shaping up to be one of the closest races in recent history. These next 48 hours will be critical for candidates to convince the many voters who are still on the fence. Our correspondents are traveling with the candidates as they try and get out the vote. Abigail Bimman is with the Liberal leader who's looking to hang on to his job and form a majority. Michael Couture is alongside the Tories who are distancing themselves from the Conservative government in Alberta. And Gill is with the NDP Leader Jagmeet Singh, who just received a high-profile endorsement from former U.S. presidential candidate Bernie Sanders. But we begin tonight with Abigail and the Liberals and their challenges on the home stretch.
Back in southern Ontario means Justin Trudeau is back face-to-face with angry protesters. These people certainly won't be voting Liberal, but the party has a bigger challenge more broadly, getting those who will out to the polls.
There seems to be a slight advantage for the Conservative Party among those older voters in terms of Conservative older voters being more committed to voting than Liberal older voters.
Ipsos pollster Daryl Bricker says the most important demographic trend is not about party, but turnout.
Even at the best of times, Canadians are never very enthusiastic about an election, so I understand the frustration.
Experts say that frustration is also a problem for potential Liberal voters.
Potentially voting for another party, but more likely just saying, you know what, I'm just going to sit this one out. I actually don't even think it's safe for me to go vote. I forgot to register for a mail-in ballot.
From day one, Trudeau has refused to say he's out to win a majority. He came the closest to that admission on day 34.
I'm not going to engage in hypothetical questions right now. We are focused on winning every seat.
I think Trudeau's dreaming. And I don't think expressing that sentiment actually contributes to swinging votes.
Saying it clearly or not, pushing for a majority means targeting tight races in the final push.
In the 905, they're particularly critical because it's a vote-rich area, and it's often determined whether you get a Liberal or Conservative government, and whether that government is minority or majority.
The Liberals are spending all day Friday and part of the final weekend targeting tight races in southern Ontario and the 905, both seats they think they can pick up and ones they're in danger of losing in fights with both Conservatives and the NDP. Abigail Bimman, Global News, London, Ontario.
One riding in the 416, Toronto, Spadina, Fort York, is a Liberal stronghold. But tonight, the party's candidate has been told to put his campaign on hold. The Liberals asked Kevin Vuong to pause as officials review details around the Crown's move to withdraw a sexual assault charge against him in 2019. Liberal leader Justin Trudeau says the party was not aware of the charge until just yesterday. Vuong says the allegations are false and troubling on the home stretch of the campaign. With the ballot set, it is unclear if Vuong will be allowed to sit as a Liberal if he does win. Like Trudeau, Conservative leader Erin O'Toole spent time in vote-rich Ontario today, once again dodging questions about Alberta Premier Jason Kenney's handling of the pandemic and the rising cases there. In the last election, Kenney was seen as an asset, flung to Ontario to court Conservative voters. But this time around, O'Toole won't even utter his name. Michael Couture reports.
I know Premier's names.
He knows their names, yet he still won't say Jason Kenney's name or comment on whether or not Alberta's Premier could have done a better job managing the COVID-19 pandemic in that province. As recently as Sunday, the federal Conservative leader praised his provincial counterpart. Even though Kenney has admitted mistakes, O'Toole won't weigh in.
In our collective fight against COVID-19, I will work with provinces and premiers of all political stripes.
It was like he'd never heard of the guy. Jason who? I don't know who this Jason guy is.
Political science professor Dwayne Bratt says O'Toole is in a tough spot because Kenney's support helped make him leader of the federal Conservatives. But the COVID-19 crisis in Alberta is hurting the Tories, and that could mean fewer seats in that province.
You could have a very bizarre situation where Erin O'Toole actually picks up seats in other parts of the country and loses them in his base. And if he does, it's not necessarily because of O'Toole, it's because of Jason Kenney.
A part of the problem is vote splitting with the far-right People's Party of Canada. It's likely why O'Toole has been trying to hammer home a new message to Canadians.
There are many parties in this race, but there's really only two choices. More of the same with Mr. Trudeau or Canada's Conservatives.
Now, that black and white choice is key in motivating voters, according to this Conservative strategist.
It is about making sure that those who have shown they're accessible to voting for you are actually going to turn up on Election Day, especially given how long lines are going to be.
O'Toole's team believes getting to those voters is better by bus, so they've ditched the plane and will concentrate campaigning in the vote-rich Toronto and Southern Ontario regions, hoping it will pave the way to forming government. Farah?
Michael Couture in Brantford, Ontario. Thank you, Mike. Alberta's new daily cases have now topped 2,000 for the first time since May. Critics say this surge could have been avoided if the Premier made tougher decisions sooner. Jason Kenney says the situation shouldn't be about politics or personalities. It should be about protecting hospitals. Demand for ICU beds has never been higher, and within 10 days, it could exceed capacity. And now the calls are growing even louder for Premier Kenney to resign, not just from his political opponents, but from inside his own party, too. Tom Vernon joins us now from Edmonton with more on this. Tom.
Farah, there have been rumblings of discontent with Premier Kenney for months now. Last spring, a website was launched by grassroots members called Kenney Must Go. It started collecting signatures calling for just that. 2 MLAs were also kicked out of caucus in the spring for publicly speaking out against the Premier, one of them directly calling for his resignation. Now, Premier Kenney had hoped his Open for Summer plan, Open for Good plan, would quiet down that discontent, and it did for a number of weeks. But with the fourth wave of COVID-19 hitting Alberta so hard, the discontent has come back to the forefront. I've been told by a constituency association president that motions for a leadership review are being discussed in constituency associations right across the province. His association has passed one. He says their concerns come from top-down leadership style, not listening to the grassroots. Oh, and that infamous meal on top of the Sky Palace patio, breaking rules with fellow cabinet ministers.
A level of entitlement that my constituency association could not stand. Even some of our board members who were not as critical of Premier Kenney up to that point, from that point on, absolutely felt as if that was the final straw.
Now, Tom, this all comes while Alberta's health system is really at the breaking point. I mean, the province is asking for help from other parts of Canada. Even today, Alberta frontline staff protested, demanding improvements to the province's healthcare system. So what are the doctors and nurses there saying, Tom?
Well, they're saying it should not have gotten to this point. They've been calling for weeks for a vaccine passport type system. Premier Kenney had been resisting that call for weeks, but finally relented this week due to the rise in cases in the ICU. We're also suffering through a severe staff shortage for healthcare workers here in the province, nurses, doctors. They're even looking at contracting private ones from outside the province. Now, there are contract negotiations ongoing between the government and nurses as well, not helping in this. They are tense. The government was seeking a wage rollback. We could see a strike vote in a matter of weeks. Farah?
Tom Vernon in Edmonton. Thank you, Tom. The NDP made a campaign stop today in Quebec, optimistic about gaining back seats in a province where the party's popularity has been declining. Leader Jagmeet Singh defended the NDP's environmental plan, and as Robin Gill reports, he targeted young voters too.
In the affable style that has become his signature, Jagmeet Singh makes his way to convince students in Sherbrooke, Quebec to vote for his party. It's the first time the NDP leader has been to this riding during the campaign. How attainable are these 3 ridings for the New Democrats?
We're very hopeful, we're very excited, very optimistic.
The NDP's popularity in Quebec has sunk from a decade ago when it was at its peak. The Liberals won Sherbrooke in 2019, and they took Sackville then.
How are you feeling, Halifax?
Halifax, too.
They're trying to pick up seats in areas where they're not present at the moment.
But But there's methods to this last bit of campaigning in these ridings, says a former NDP strategist.
It sends a positive message elsewhere in the country that you're campaigning in seats where at the beginning of the campaign, people would think you did not have a chance to win.
Up next, Saskatoon. For a riding the NDP lost by less than 3,000 votes in 2019. Then it's off to Edmonton for the one riding the party secured the last time around in a province that is traditionally true blue. Robin Gill, Global News, Dartmouth, Nova Scotia.
And Donna Friesen will anchor our extensive coverage on Election Night Monday right here on Global TV, as well as on History, Global News Radio, and various online platforms, including, of course, globalnews.ca. Some sad news out of Ontario tonight. The top doctor in the Waterloo region says a child under the age of 10 has died from COVID-19 related issues. The child is the youngest person in the region to die from the virus.
This is a rare but tragic circumstance and a devastating reminder of the serious nature of this virus. This is a heartbreaking loss.
Doctors say the child had underlying health conditions and there were no school-related or daycare-related exposures. The criminal case involving Canada's former top soldier has been adjourned until mid-October. Retired General Jonathan Vance is charged with obstruction of justice in relation to a military investigation into misconduct allegations made against him, accusations he denies. Court documents suggest Vance made repeated attempts to persuade a female officer who told Global News that she had an intimate relationship with him to make false statements to investigators. Thousands of Ontario students walked out at Western University today to show their support for victims and survivors of gender-based violence. They're protesting what they say is a culture of misogyny at the school after a series of sexual assault allegations in recent days. As Brittany Rosen reports, they're demanding the university do more to protect them.
What do we want? Protect our campus! When do we want it? Now!
It's a cry for an end to gender-based violence and sexual assaults, an issue some here refer to as an epidemic that has plagued Western University.
No more silence!
Following a series of sexual assault allegations during the first week of school that have allegedly targeted up to 30 female students, people gathered here to stand in solidarity with victims and survivors, including Bryn.
Had I come forward earlier, would the institution have done anything to help prevent future incidents from occurring? Of course, none of these sentiments mattered after learning that up to 30 lives had been forever altered.
Students made signs, hung messages of support, and vocalized their concerns about campus safety.
Do you know what it's like to walk past the site of the most traumatic experience of your life every day just to get to class?
This just one of numerous unsettling accounts from those who go to school here.
Being silent about this problem is perpetuating this culture, and I just hope that from today there can be changes made.
At the peak of the protest, campus police reported up to 9,000 participants.
Thousands of students here are calling on the university to do more to address what they're calling a culture problem. Among their demands, they want to see a survivor-centric approach to handling reports of gender-based violence and sexual assault.
We want a safe space for dialogue and support for survivors, which the university has failed to provide.
As for staff at Western, they say they too are well aware of students' experiences.
The incidents of the past week and you being here today tell us that you do not feel safe.
While counseling and other supports remain in place on campus, Western has since created a task force to handle gender-based violence and student safety. Brittany Rosen, Global News.
A heartwarming reunion between a boy and his dad in Canada. Coming up, how the Afghanistan crisis tore them apart. An Afghan man and his little boy have been reunited in Canada after spending months apart.
Welcome.
The two were reunited Monday at Toronto's Pearson Airport. The toddler was separated from his family during the mayhem at Kabul Airport last month. Turns out he'd been put on a plane to Couteur and remained there until officials were able to track him down. Speaking through an interpreter, the boy's father says the reunion has been unbelievable.
He cannot put his feelings into words, but he was really, really happy when he saw his son.
The boy's mother and 4 siblings remain in Afghanistan, but the father is hopeful that they too will come to Canada. Still ahead, accusations of Islamophobia on the campaign trail and the candidate who's firing back. As we hit the home stretch of this election campaign, we're looking at some of the first-time candidates and the backstories behind their political drive. Mike Armstrong introduces us to Nsef Haider, the Bloc candidate in Sherbrooke, Quebec, and human rights activist whose husband is imprisoned in Saudi Arabia.
Bonjour à tout le monde.
The public part of politics isn't new for Nsef Haider. For years, she's toured the world speaking about her husband's imprisonment, calling for his release. Freedom of expression is one of the things she wants to push in Parliament. If I have a voice in the House of Commons in Ottawa, she says, I will use that voice. Now, it was her husband's voice that landed him in prison. Raif Badawi, a writer in Saudi Arabia, was arrested in 2012. For the crime of insulting Islam, he was sentenced to 10 years and 1,000 lashes. This was Badawi in 2015, getting the first 50 lashes. Haider says seeing that video was hard, but that she was less concerned about the physical pain her husband was feeling than the mental toll of his imprisonment. Haider moved to Canada as a refugee with the couple's 3 children. They've lived in Sherbrooke, Quebec since 2013. She says she's been asked often why someone who's been in Canada for less than a decade and a citizen for barely 3 years would run for the Bloc Québécois, a party that's working to break up the country. Haider says she is thankful to Canada, but that she found her independence in Quebec and feels Quebec should find its independence. I'm a citizen like everyone else, she says. I have the right to choose. Now, Haider has come under heavy criticism for getting too close to the far right. She's been accused of being Islamophobic. She supported Maxime Bernier's People's Party of Canada before the last election. In 2019, she met with prominent anti-Muslim activist Robert Spencer, calling him a good friend. And earlier this year, tweeted criticism of the CBC for hiring a journalist who wears a hijab, saying, quote, "It started like that in Iran." Well, Haider says Islamophobia doesn't exist. And as for supporting controversial figures, she argues simply they were nice to her, so she was nice to them. Now, there appears to be some discomfort in the party about some of those positions. Campaigning in the riding with the leader of the Bloc, reporters tried to ask Haider questions. Yves-François Blanchet didn't let her speak while he was there, saying it wasn't the time. But since then, she hasn't held back. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Sherbrooke, Quebec.
Next, the fight to get the highest honor for a Canadian war hero. Canada has always put humility before showmanship when it comes to celebrating our armed forces. The U.S., Australia, Britain, and New Zealand all awarded their top military honors to Afghanistan war veterans. But as Mike Drolet explains, a group of Canadian veterans, including former Chief of the Defence Staff General Rick Hillier, is hoping to change that, and soon.
The agony of this moment must have been unbearable for Private Jess La Rochelle, saying goodbye to 2 good friends, all the while in physical agony.
You broke your back, yet you still carried the casket the next day at the ramp ceremony.
Yeah, I was having trouble walking and that, and the warrant officer told me to go to the hospital, and I said after I carry Blake or Darcy's casket, I'll go right away.
Private Blake Williamson and Sergeant Darcy Tedford were killed by the Taliban securing a road construction project in Afghanistan in 2006. La Rochelle survived the attack, if only barely. 15 years later, La Rochelle's injuries have caught up with him. He spoke with us from a hospital bed in North Bay about a group of Afghanistan veterans who are trying to right a wrong. La Rochelle, the group says, should have been awarded the Canadian Victoria Cross. The Taliban attack was swift. and he was knocked unconscious by an RPG. When he came to, his back was broken, as was his gun, and over 20 Taliban fighters were approaching. He found a pile of 15 M72 rocket launchers and fired them all off, one by one.
From what I understand, that his firing with the rockets was so accurate that he was hitting them directly. And that maybe also indicate just how close they were.
And we, in my view, would have lost a lot of Canadians that day that we did not lose because of Jess Larochelle's valor.
Canada hasn't awarded a Victoria Cross since 1945. General Rick Hillier admits the committee that decided on medals in Afghanistan has been conservative in its decision-making. So now he, along with other veterans, have sent a letter to the Governor-General asking for La Rochelle's case to be reviewed before his health declines further.
Things are not looking good for Jess. If you're going to do something like this, and you want, because Jess would be extremely honored, to get it as alive. Don't ask me how he would feel once he's passed.
So now the battle is with government bureaucracy, but La Rochelle has faced overwhelming odds before. Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
And that is it for Global National for this Friday night. I'm Farah Nasser. Thank you so much for spending part of your evening with us. Tonight's Your Canada is Kananaskis, Alberta. We love seeing your Canada, so please keep emailing us your pictures at viewers@globalnational.com. Neetu Garcha will be at the anchor desk over the weekend, and I'm going to see you on Monday night alongside Donna Friesen for Global's extensive election coverage. Until then, take care of yourselves and each other.